Welcome to What I Watch Wednesdays. Today we're going to be talking about season 5 of The Bear. When The Bear first premiered in 2022, the show very quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Let's talk a bit about the background. The premise is relatively simple and is centered around this one restaurant owned by a deceased restaurateur named Michael and the plights of his brother after he is forced to come back home to take over Michael's restaurant. Carmi is a world-class chef. He has to essentially take over a broken down, barely functional restaurant and save it from financial ruin. The Bear has become an absolute Emmy darling. It's one of the most decorated shows in modern TV. A big point of contention actually comes from the fact that this very obvious drama show keeps getting put into the comedy section. One of the most interesting things about the show was that it kind of became successful because of the amount of memes that you see on TikTok, Twitter, Reddit. At first being clowned on the fact that it's winning Emmys in the comedy section when it's so obviously not a comedy, and then people started watching it and just really got into it. I feel like it's important to give you guys a summary of seasons 1 to 4. So season 1 opens up in the aftermath of Carmi's older brother Michael passing away. Carmi inherits a failing restaurant business. He has to boost the morale up. Carmi himself is obviously dealing with his own issues. He has a lot of toxic mentors in the past that he constantly gets reminded of whenever he's faced with high intense situations. He obviously has to deal with the fact that Michael has passed away. Throughout the series, we see him trying to deal with all of these issues, with him randomly getting screamed at in his memories. We also get introduced to the character of Sydney here. She originally joins the restaurant as just a stager because she believes in Carmi. She introduces herself as a wonderful character who will fall in line and listen to orders given the fact that she has enough justification. We finally also meet Richie, who is Michael's best friend. He and Carmi kind of immediately start fighting with each other, and it's originally presented as a very antagonistic relationship, but over the seasons we see them develop a very close relationship. We see that his defensive nature is really just a facade in the place of his own grief. Richie's story is so enhanced by the fact that he has to watch every single person around him grow and develop while he feels like he's stuck in place. The end of the season happens when Carmi opens up a bunch of old cans and finds hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash as well as a letter from Michael. This allows him to start fresh. He no longer wants to just pay off all the debts that Michael left behind. He and Sydney decide to instead create a new restaurant and close down the original one, and that's where we get the name of The Bear. Season 2 delves into trying to make the pieces that they have thoughtfully put together work again. They begin to reconstruction processes to try to build this new restaurant, but they immediately run into a bunch of different roadblocks throughout the way. They have construction delays, issues that threatens to use up several $100,000. We see Marcus and Tina, two supporting characters who work at the restaurant, going out and trying to better themselves. We also see Sydney going across Chicago and exposing herself to different culinary styles and trying to figure out what the menu will be. This season is where Richie really hits his own stride. He originally goes out and is forced to work at a Michelin star restaurant polishing forks. Comes back a changed man. He no longer has this insecure wall of grief about him, which is a marked change from the broken man that we've seen up until this episode. Carmi, meanwhile, also goes out and tries to improve himself by picking up his old crush from childhood named Claire. The new sense of peace kind of scares him. All around the season, we build up to the moment that the Bear officially opens. Carmi accidentally locks himself into the fridge on opening night. Sydney takes over and really hits her stride in leadership. Richie also steps up while Carmi is stuck in the fridge, and the two of them manage to save the night. Meanwhile, Carmi is in the fridge self-sabotaging, unaware that Claire is literally standing right outside the door while he's ranting about his relationship with her. Claire overhears him when she leaves. He and Richie get into a screaming match, and even though the restaurant itself ended up being a success despite all of the issues that they had to deal with, Carmi is left in a desolate state where he doesn't know where he wants to go in life, and he doesn't even know if he has a life outside of the restaurant. With season 3's opener, we begin by seeing Carmi still in the state of being a very broken man, and he is trying to punish himself by making it grueling for everybody. And one of the final parts of the season is when Sydney is offered another job at a rival restaurant, and she wants to take it because Carmi is becoming increasingly self-punishing. He doesn't feel like he's worthy of running the restaurant, and he doesn't want to sign her on as an official partner. Richie tries to keep up with a fine dining standard, but against all of the chaos that is happening, it's becoming increasingly difficult. This leads to a lot of problems, which finally culminate in a funeral dinner. Season 4 picks up right where we left off, with all of these different threads finally resolving themselves somewhat. The main financier of this entire project, called Uncle Jimmy, threatens to pull his investment if the restaurant doesn't finally start to turn the profit. Season 4 centers around the increasing rift that we see between Carmi and Sydney. This leads to a lot of different fights that the two of them have about creativity and who gets to be in charge of the restaurant. Richie, in a very surprising twist from the character that we met all the way back in season 1, becomes becomes an emotional backbone of everybody who works at the restaurant. He is able to successfully talk to both Carmy and all of the other staff members and settle out all of the differences. Carmy, being Carmy, is still trapped in the prison of his own mind. What I didn't like about season 4 is that even though we see all of this tension happening throughout the season, we didn't really end up seeing any conclusive ends to anything. The finale episode basically confirms that nothing is actually resolved. Sydney doesn't know if she's gonna stay or if she's gonna quit. Carmy still has not dealt with his own trauma. I hated the way that they did do that from season 2 onwards, of leaving it in a point where it ends on a cliffhanger with a bunch of different unresolved storylines. It's like the show is so successful, they knew that they were going to get a new season. I don't like the fact that they keep doing this. They introduce so many different issues that happen with some of the other side characters. Nothing ends up being resolved. It's like a constant pile on of different issues as opposed to resolutions. With season 5, it opens up once again on this very hectic nature of all of these problems have finally culminated, and this season you kind of have to iron it out because it was announced in advance that season 5 would end up being the last season. Episode 1 starts out with Tina just quietly doing some prep work. If the restaurant doesn't begin to turn a profit, this might be the end of the road for the restaurant itself. Nobody can really help anything at this point. They are all trying desperately to make things work. There is a severe rainstorm that hits in this episode that carries on throughout the entirety of the season. During this winter storm, Sydney arrives and she's already kind of over it. She's tired. Richie has to deal with a reservation system that has now crashed, and this causes him to reminisce on a memory with Mikey. This causes him to unfortunately crash into another car because of the storm and because of his own memory gathering. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, everything starts going badly, of course. There's a bunch of different structural issues that are happening. Richie finally manages to get into the restaurant after surviving his crash, and Sydney is in the process of leaving, but he manages to get her back. The money problems, of course, keep getting worse. Uncle Jimmy ends up being forced to sell the building. Richie promises everybody that the restaurant will not close down. All of these problems coalesce in a sewage pipe literally bursting and dousing the entire restaurant in raw sewage. Episode 2 does not slow its roll in any way, shape, or form. The kitchen is unusable because of all of the sewage. Even though a normal restaurant would have shut down by this point, the Bears' last chance is literally on this night. Carmy at this point just shuts down, which allows Sydney to take the reins. She organizes all the staff in order to figure out a way to make the restaurant survive. A bunch of different workers in the restaurant try to get the restaurant back up and running. Carmy attempts to pull himself together, but ends up unfortunately making things worse. Things continue to get worse when their main ingredient, Wagyu beef, doesn't make it because of the rain, and they're forced to pivot towards lamb to make the restaurant opening still happen. Everybody basically cracks at this point. This results in a massive shouting match that erupts between literally everybody who is in the restaurant. Sydney at this point decides to just take full charge, telling everybody her new plan for opening night, which includes stripping down a lot of the accoutrements around their menu items and just doing a very bare bones service. Unfortunately, the broken reservation system decides to fix itself, and they start getting flooded with a lot of different orders, which causes everybody to start panicking. With episode 3, we see Carmy slowly gather himself, and he realizes that he has now lost control of the kitchen and Sydney is the one in charge. He tries to get her to tell everybody that he's decided to leave. She refuses. All of this again leads to everybody basically having a massive fight when the reservation system leads to all of the tables being triple booked. During this fight, Sydney accidentally tells everybody that Carmy is planning on leaving, which causes even more people to get angry with Carmy. This leads Carmy to just take a step back. He leaves everything in the control of Sydney, who is scared but thinks that she can still fix the issues. At this point, one of the investors for the business falls through the roof as if enough things haven't gone wrong. I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to rectify things. I felt like 3 episodes and counting of continuous issue after issue after issue was a little bit much. There's been 0 wins for any of the characters. I don't like the fact that they just kept piling on, and I was honestly really worried that they would not be able to resolve any of the major issues that any of the characters were dealing with. Episode 4 begins with Carmy and Richie just having a heart-to-heart talking about how they're doing and how the situation is so bad. Richie doesn't appreciate the fact that Carmy is literally trying to just get away from all of the nonsense going on outside. Carmy asks Richie how he's actually doing. It's a very rare instance where any member of the team asks Richie how they're doing, and he has a mini breakdown. He has gotten into a crash because he's just reminiscing on the past. He's never got fully over and contextualized Michael's passing all the way back in season 1. If you think about the timeline of the show, things are moving very, very quickly. We're 4 episodes in, but a matter of hours have passed by. The rest of the seasons are similar in that things move by so quickly. Meanwhile, the kitchen tries to fix the hole in the roof, clean up all the sewage. Uncle Jimmy try to fix all of the issues with the building's air rights, because it's obvious that even if this season ends with the opening night going wonderfully, the money will not be enough to fix all of the issues that just happened. About an hour or so before opening, when they share something called family meal, which is when all of the people in the restaurant basically get together and have a meal before the restaurant opens up. In this, Sydney has taken full ownership of the restaurant and she's strung down the menu to make it fit with all of their ingredients going missing. Richie also has done his part in trimming down all of the accoutrements to make it a very bare bones but functional dining experience. The Michelin critic is still on their way. During family meal, Carmi spots a bunch of different cans of tuna and he realizes that they can just use the tuna instead of trying to make things work. This solves one of the biggest problems that everybody was feeling. Sydney approves of this decision. Richie delivers a very heartfelt speech and the doors finally open. Episode 5 opens up on this note of maybe things are finally starting to turn around. There is still a storm raging on outside and this causes nobody to show up when they open up the restaurant. Contrary to what you might think, this does not cause anybody to be happy because every single delay just means that that guest is going to come later, which is going to stack up the problem of overlapping guests booking the same table even more. Sydney discovers that Richie never canceled any of the orders, so they're just going to be stuck with a surplus of orders on top of all of the people who are late to their current reservations. Sugar, or Natalie, takes over all of the different timings that are happening. She cuts down all of the dining experiences to very bare bones, 30 minutes in and out. Natalie's husband shows up for dinner and is immediately just put to work. While he's working outside with the rest of the guys, he happens to know a little bit about the building's air rights, which might save them. Sydney tells Tina that she will always have a spot with her if she wants one. This is one of Tina's biggest worries. This vote of confidence gives Tina the vote of confidence that she needs to continue to work throughout the night. Episode 6 starts out with all of the delayed guests slowly trickling in the restaurant to quickly reach full capacity. Richie ironically loves all of the chaos, which is a marked difference from the Richie that would have been flustered and freaking out back in season 1. He turns all of the weirdness that's going on into a hospitality experience. Carmi starts to accept himself and lowers down the walls that he's had up, and he kind of starts just having a good time. Everything starts to line up. Unfortunately, nothing ever stays fully calm for long, and Sydney discovers that Richie did all of this on purpose. He double, triple booked everything on purpose. Richie says that this is part of the Bear's magic, that the chaos that they were just dealing with for several hours before opening night is entirely what is the magic behind the Bear. One of the people finally confirms that the Michelin star reviewer is in the restaurant and everybody kind of panics about it. Episode 7 begins with the kitchen being full to the brink because of the triple booking that Richie accidentally on purpose caused. The Michelin critic meanwhile has placed their order and the entire team locks in to try to make that order really, really good. Carmi goes back to his usual ways, but in a way that actually helps everybody move along. There are a few different disasters, but unlike earlier seasons, everything still flows smoothly. The last episode of the entire show begins with the morning after this very hectic night. Nobody can believe the fact that they managed to pull off that night with very minimal issues. Everything is still held on by a thread because the financial worries are still an issue, but there is an undercurrent of hope. Richie gets an offer to go to Tokyo because his astounding hospitality from the night before made high-end diners impress. Carmi and Uncle Jimmy are crunching numbers. They reach a mutual understanding of Uncle Jimmy backing the sandwich concept, and with Carmi finally understanding that he has a lot of trauma and that he needs to fare his stuff out, Sydney is now fully capable of taking on the restaurant and running things day to day. This is backed by the fact that they actually earned a Michelin star. The show ends on this note with nothing really being finalized, more so the characters realizing that things are working out now because they themselves have worked out all the trauma, or at least some of the trauma that they have been dealing with, even though it's bittersweet because everybody's leaving. The tone of the show is very hopeful, everybody knowing that things might still go wrong, but because the characters have grown so much throughout the seasons, things will be okay. Alright, that was a doozy, but that is essentially everything that happened in The Bear. So let's talk about all the different things that actually worked out. The first thing that I want to commend the entire team on is the fact that they didn't just focus on plot resolution, they focused on making sure that every character's behavioral issues are also resolved. The main driver of the entire show is all of these different characters and the vast amounts of trauma that they carry with them. Season 5 handles all of these concurrent storylines. There are other storylines that I didn't really get into in the interest of time. As a whole, season 5 resolves all of these different characters' storylines in a very full fulfilling way that feels realistic. Obviously in real life, not everybody's going to end up with a happy ending, and that's kind of what happened with the bear. The amount of issues that they go through in order to get to the point where everybody's okay feels very well earned. A lot of the issues that the characters were dealing with, like Sydney's imposter syndrome being the biggest one, don't just get resolved because of one good night. The characters learn how to be okay with these insecurities. They learn to deal with them in a very healthy manner as opposed to just blowing everything up and regressing. I cannot talk about the air finality that comes from everybody's arcs ending in a very realistic manner without talking about Richie's arc in particular. Richie starts off the show incredibly broken, and he has so many walls built up around him. He never allows himself to feel the grief that he's going through because of Michael's death and because of his own issues with his mother. Richie's character development is just so good. Very, very few TV shows, I feel, are able to build on this broken character and realistically make them into a well-rounded, wholesome character. The real beauty in Richie's character development is that he fundamentally does not change. He's still loud, he's aggressive, but instead of just hiding his feelings, he now knows to deal with them in a more mature way. He becomes the emotional backbone of the series in many ways, and a lot of different characters end up turning to him to talk to about the different problems that they're dealing with. I've talked about this, but Sydney finally being able to step into her leadership role that she's been wanting since season 1 was really well executed. The very natural progression of Carmy kind of shutting down completely because he himself has never dealt with the trauma of his past, and Sydney taking the reins and dealing with all the chaos that is happening was extremely natural. The way that they structure their dialogue, the camera work, all of that stuff is done in a way that makes you feel the intense pressure that the characters are in a very natural way. I enjoyed the return to form from the filming styles of seasons 3 and 4 being done in like a vignette kind of way to the more natural way of filming that seasons 1 and 2 had. It's just boots on the ground, hectic, chaotic, and I like that more than like storytelling in a traditional sense because you aren't able to get as immersed into the story. That being said, I definitely had a few different issues with the season as a whole. The first one being that a lot of the stories that we have seen are repetitions of issues that we've seen in previous seasons. For example, Carmy's entire arc of not being able to deal with his toxic past and not being able to collaborate successfully with people is something that we literally have seen throughout every season. I feel like that's just kind of phoning it in. Like, you could have made more storylines for Carmy. The season ends with him finally stepping back from the role of being the head chef day to day to try to discover who he is outside of restauranting, and I think that it would have been more beneficial to see that happen at the beginning of this season. Obviously that couldn't really be done because the entirety of the season is over the course of a single day. It's less wild than some of the earlier seasons were, and while that was a very deliberate choice, and I think that it's a very good choice, I think that they could have sprinkled in a little bit more chaoticness because a few of the earlier seasons had standout episodes that were entirely because of how wild the storylines got, as opposed to this one being almost too realistic. Because the entirety of this 8 episodes take place across essentially one opening night, obviously there's going to be some lag. The pacing was not the best, I would say, especially with those first 4 episodes. I just felt like it was just too much negativity. There were literally no wins, and I understand fully why they did that. I don't approve of the way that they did it. Maybe cutting down the amount of chaos to like 3 episodes and then spending 4, 5, 6 trying to build stuff up, keeping 7 as like the capstone, and then making 8 a very well-rounded culmination of everybody's character would have been better, as opposed to rushing the ending. Because of the way that the pacing was done, we didn't really see closure in the fullest extent that we could have, namely with the fact that we never really saw any resolution to Carmy's personal plight. He and Sydney kind of had a little thing going on. He and Claire obviously had a little thing going on. So while we saw his emotional ending, the interpersonal relationships between a few of the characters were not really resolved. I think that that was also done in a very deliberate way because, again, I feel like this season especially was done in a way that was like very realistic. Like, nothing ends in a very traditional happily ever after, because they did spend so much time building up Sydney and Carmy's relationship as well as Claire and Carmy's relationship. I wanted to see an ending. My final verdict for the season is that it was an outstanding piece of television. Truly everything came together in a way that I didn't think that they would be able to pull off after seeing literally 4 episodes of back-to-back-to-back chaos. This season kind of changed in the fact that the early seasons went on just sheer survival at most point. This season ended on a note of going away from survival and more into thriving. The people who are running this restaurant have finally kind of met their own momentum, and they're able to deal with the issues that they have to deal with in a very natural way. The very realistic ending of the show, where not every single piece of the characters' issues get resolved, also felt like it was really good. I never felt like anything was too idealistic. All of the characters ended in a place that ended up making sense for where the character was at that point in the story. Overall, the show definitely did not end with everybody's happily ever after. It ends with everybody finding their footing. With all of that being said, I give this a 9.5 out of 10. Like I said, it is such a tight, well-written, well-filmed piece of television. I think that this season, more than any of the other seasons, has outdone itself, making the most out of what they had and being able to tell a story that felt conclusive, even if it didn't end on a 100% happy note. I don't think anybody could have expected The Bear to end on a 100% happy note. I would highly recommend anybody to watch the entire series. That is all for today. Let me know in the comments below if you guys agree with my critiques and what you thought of The Bear's final season. I love you guys so much. Let me know what else I should watch and review in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!